Aloha and welcome to the video. So for this week, I'm going to be doing a part 1 of a knife making series. That's right, I'm becoming a knife maker. Well, not quite. So I'm going to be making a batch of 7 Pahoa or Marlin bill tipped Pahoa knives. So a Pahoa is a Hawaiian dagger. Now, a traditional Pahoa is quite a bit of different shape, but I have these smaller striper Marlin bills that I've been holding on to for maybe like 4 or 5 years, maybe a little longer. I haven't really used them because they're kind of smaller, and usually the weapons that I like to make with Marlin bills tend to be a little bit larger pieces, spears, short spears, stuff like that. So I haven't really touched these for a long time, but I have a lot of spare pieces of koa left over from other larger pieces that I've been making. And so I decided I was going to make some Marlin tipped daggers or Pahoa. So the first step that I have to do with these, it's the same with all of them that I've done before. If you've watched any of my other videos, is I hollowed out the center of those Marlin bills. I hollowed it out with just a drill bit and an old chisel that I had, just cleaning it out. One thing though that was kind of a unique challenge for these that I haven't really come across yet is I don't normally make this many pieces at once. And so as I was wrapping the bills up, so it's the first step that I do before I fill them when I go to fill the Marlin bills with epoxy, is I wrap them with painter's tape, and it helps the epoxy just stay in there because there's a lot of micro cracks in the bills and the epoxy will just drain out if you don't wrap it. But I didn't really have a place to put it. So I was trying to think about what to do, and I came up with this idea, just kind of a pseudo vise. I just have a couple of pieces of 2x2 clamped with a 1x, and it actually worked out really well. The one thing that I forgot to do after wrapping is I didn't quite record pouring most of it. I just have this section here. So after pouring it, the air bubbles come out, they start to settle in, the epoxy will settle down, and you kind of just got to watch it and fill it back up a little bit more and keep your eye on it. But it really wasn't that big of a deal. The holder here worked really well. I was really pleased with it. I probably won't do something like this again. So for a one-time rack to hold a whole bunch of Marlin bills as I get them ready for putting into the piece, it worked out really well. You can see right there I've got a whole batch of different koa blocks. Now none of these are stabilized. So if you're familiar with what stabilization is, it's kind of where you get to the wood, you get the wood to a point where it's not going to absorb moisture anymore. These are just dried out. And so most of the koa that I deal with is not stabilized. And so to keep it from, expanding and shrinking in the weather, I always oil it and then coat it after I'm done. And it's kind of the same concept with what I'm doing with the Marlin bills and filling them with epoxy, is it helps to stabilize the Marlin bills as well. It fills in all of the micro cracks, all of the crevices, so that they don't build any type of mildew or anything like that in the center. And then it also helps for mounting them to the wood. Once the epoxy is set, I just go back and pull off the tape. You can notice it's kind of a pain sometimes. What'll happen is the epoxy that I use when I fill the bills is a slow setting epoxy, and I use that just because it tends to be, the one that I have is a more smooth epoxy. It's a low viscous epoxy, so it really fills in on the cracks, but it can also get in between the painter's tape if I don't seal it really well, and so it can make it sometimes a hassle to get it all off, but it's not too bad. I'm going to be going back over all of these anyway and hitting them with a grind wheel, so it's really not that big of a deal. So the next step here is I'm just going to be picking kind of what piece that I want to fit each Marlin bill. These are all scrap. It's all koa wood. Some of it has some really pretty curls. I was really excited as I was going through it. You can see that one there has some really pretty curl. But these are all, I never throw away my scrap koa because I never know I'm going to use it again. It's not uncommon that I come back and I've got an idea or I've got something I want to try out, and I'll use a piece of scrap koa that I have from the past. So if you're ever doing any projects and you've got any type of material that's a little bit more expensive or exotic material, I recommend not throwing any of the scrap away. You never know when you might be doing something else and you'll just need, a small chunk of some of that material and be like, oh, I threw it away. So that's a good idea. So what I'm doing here is I'm just drawing in the line. So each of these are going to be relatively the same shape. One thing that I decided to do midway through is give each one kind of a unique contour. And so each one of these pahoas is going to be a little bit unique from the last. Unfortunately, you won't get to see that in this video. That'll be in the next video. So you want to see the different designs, different shapes that I do for them. That'll all be in the next video. This video, I'm primarily focusing on just getting the bills affixed to the koa wood. So I'm going to be using a joint for these. So the total connection point, I'm going to use like a tongue and groove joint, and then I'm going to epoxy that into place, and then I'm going to use a cross pin out of wood to finish it off. And that'll help keep the bills really affixed to the koa. It's a really strong fit. And all of these have the wood going long grain, so they're all going to be pretty tough. And you can see there I have those joints cut out. I cut out almost 99% of the bandsaw. You just get a little bit, over time, just a little bit better at cutting tight edges on the bandsaw. I do use a hand sander a little bit, but not much. I usually can get a pretty tight fit just by using my bandsaw. So now I'm mixing up some epoxy with wood shavings. I'm doing that so that the epoxy blends better with the wood, so that there's any gaps or holes, it'll just fill in a little bit better. So I got all of them epoxied into place. I ended up needing to wrap them a little bit in painter's tape, just because they were I put a little bit too much epoxy in some places and it was dripping all over the place, so that helped. So I've got them all set. I let it sit overnight, and I'm back at it the next day. So what I'm doing here is I'm just drilling in the holes for this. These are 1/4-inch wooden dowels. I decided to use those just because they're a little bit stronger. I thought about going, a little bit smaller than a 1/4-inch, but the 1/4-inch ended up being a good fit. And then I'm using a wood glue to set in the dowels. I used to use epoxy, but I kind of like the wood glue a little bit better now. It just holds a little bit easier and it sounds a little bit better. The epoxy works good between the Marlin bills and the koa because there's already epoxy on the Marlin bills from when I filled them. And so I think that holds a little bit better there. So I'm just going through and putting in, and this will be the last step for these bills. If you like this video, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps me out. Otherwise, I see you next time. Leave any comments below, anything else you'd like me to explain or go over. So it was a lot of fun, and I'm excited for next week and finishing up the knives. Aloha.